Hey folks, how's it going? I've got a lot I want to talk about here in a little bit, primarily about the economy, how our national debt, and not only the national debt, but the interest on the national debt is increasing exponentially. But before I get into that, I'd like to ask you to like, share, subscribe if you haven't done any of those things. If you feel like you get anything useful from this video or this channel, please do that. It really helps the algorithm and it really helps me out. Okay, so I got several articles here. I don't know that I'll be able to go through all of them, but I'm going to try. But before I even get to those, I want to comment about the last short video that I uploaded about 5 days ago. It was a video about how Victoria was locking down again for the 5th time for a period of 5 days. All right, so it came to my attention not long after I posted that it was an old video from back in 2021 that someone had re-edited to make it and reposted it to make it look like it was a recent current year video, that it was happening again right now. I apologize for that. Normally I vet videos and articles a lot better than what I did with that one. I messed up on that one. I didn't vet it as good as I should have, or as I could usually do, and for that I apologize. But I did want to put that out there, that I made a mistake. I'm a big enough man to be able to admit when I make a mistake, and I hope you folks understand. You know, I was busy in between shifts, getting home, and it came from what is usually a reliable source for me. But you know, things happen. People make mistakes. Nobody's perfect, me least of all. But I did want to apologize for that. However, as one viewer did comment, it's a good reminder of what actually happened. And therefore, for that very reason, I decided to leave it up rather than take it down. But I did want to put that apology out there and just let you guys know that I am aware that it was a misleading video, and I apologize for that. I slipped up on it, and hopefully it won't be the last time. I mean, hopefully it'll be the last time, but you know, like I said, nobody's perfect, especially me. So I'll probably make more mistakes in the future. But anyway, all right, so getting on to the main point of this video, I wanted to talk about how our debt is increasing exponentially. Now, for 200 years, this country has, how do I want to put this? Over the first 200 years of this country's history, 42 presidents, we racked up a mere $5 trillion in debt. Now, for many, many years there, up until right after World War II, I believe, we actually ran a budget surplus. We didn't have a deficit as a nation. We didn't have a national debt. We were able to pay off all of our debts. But for the first 200 years, under 42 presidents, we accumulated approximately $5 trillion in debt. The majority of that being in the last few presidents. Then came Bush, Obama, Trump, and now Biden. So under Bush, in a period of, I believe it was 8 years, we doubled our debt from $5 trillion to $10 trillion. Again, that was a Republican president, doubled the debt in 8 years. Now, bear in mind, as I've said, 200 years, 42 presidents, $5 trillion in debt. Hang on a second. Sorry, that was a squirrel jumping around in the trees behind me. I didn't know what that was for a second. So 200 years, 42 presidents, we racked up $5 trillion in debt. In 8 years, one Republican president doubled that debt. Okay, so in 8 years, we went from $5 trillion to $10 trillion. All right, under Obama's presidency, another 8 years, we doubled it again. This time it was a Democrat. So we went from $10 trillion in debt to $20 trillion. Then we had Trump. And again, the debt exploded. I believe it went up to like 21 or 22 trillion dollars. I'm trying to recall these numbers off the top of my head, folks. I'm sorry. I got a lot of stuff here, but I don't have those particular numbers with me. But under Biden, in just, 3 short years, we went from, 21, 22, somewhere around in there, to now almost $31.5 trillion in debt. This year alone, we're running a $1.7 trillion deficit. Now, every time our debt doubles like this, our interest payment on this debt increases also, which is quickly running up to be, we're still able to cover that debt payment, but like any credit card, the higher you get that balance, the more interest you get charged, the harder it is to pay down that debt, to keep from going over budget or over your limit, so to speak. And that's what these shutdowns keep coming back to. I don't know where they're at. I haven't had time to actually read the articles and watch the news to find out exactly where they are with the current shutdown debate. But the last I heard was that they were trying to include more aid for Ukraine as non-negotiable in this new debt debate. So again, we're willing to shut down our own government. We're willing to furlough our own workers and cut off people's benefits, but aid to Ukraine it's unthinkable to even consider stopping that. They would rather shut down our own government than shut down aid to Ukraine. That should tell you something about our government. And again, it's not just Democrats, it's Republicans as well. This type of spending, this type of debt increase is unsustainable. I mean, how long can we keep kicking the can down the road before we literally have to shut everything down and reset our currency? It's happened in the past. Most people don't realize that, but it has happened in the past. One of those times was I believe it was 71 when we were taken off the gold standard. When the dollar was ceased to be backed by gold. And for all intents and purposes, that was a reset of the currency. We defaulted on our debt at that time. Although historians and economists will tell you we didn't, technically we did. So this first article that I want to cover kind of covers a bunch of this. It comes from Watcher Guru. And again, all these articles will be linked in the description below. U.S. economy added $10 trillion in debt in the last 3 years. The U.S. economy added $10 trillion in debt since 2020, nearly after Joe Biden took over the presidency, according to data from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. This comes directly from the Federal Reserve. The U.S. national debt reached an all-time high of $33 trillion in 2023, experiencing an increase of $2 trillion in a year. The debt limit in January this year stood at $31.41 trillion and steadily rose for 9 consecutive months. The debt crisis reflected a looming danger to the U.S. economy as it gave rise to inflation and affected the Consumer Price Index. Hang on just a second. Inflation is up 3.7% this month. It's up 3.7%, so it had started to come down just a little bit, at least according to the government's numbers. As I would tell you, and a lot of other people would tell you, it hasn't really. But according to the government's numbers, it did start coming down just a little bit. Now it's up again, 3.7% this month. It needs to fall below 2% for the U.S. economy to cool down. I'm going to tell you it's not going to happen. The debt crisis comes at a time when BRICS is looking to dethrone the U.S. dollar, and I've got an article about that coming up. From the Global Reserve, an uncontrolled debt could lead to turmoil in the U.S. economy, giving undue advantage for BRICS to move ahead. Moreover, BRICS is ending reliance on the U.S. dollar, making the currency difficult to fund its deficit. If America fails to fund its deficit and import its inflation to other countries, hold on one second, prices of goods and commodities could skyrocket. Inflation is already a concern in America as prices of goods, real estate, and other day-to-day essentials have gone up. Rent across the country is rising, and the average American is unable to afford a decent home. Okay, so the debt ceiling is a cap on how much the United States Treasury can actively borrow to function. Now, lawmakers need to decide if they will lift the cap again, something that has been done over 100 times in the last century. So bear that in mind. They've raised the debt cap over 100 times. But understand this, what they mean by importing our inflation, or rather exporting our inflation, would be probably a better term. When we print more money, what we're essentially doing is we're selling treasuries and bonds to other countries, and we're borrowing. To borrow money from them, we're giving them these bonds. So we're essentially borrowing money from other countries, using our worthless bonds, at least in my opinion, as security for the money that we're borrowing, so that we can continue to spend like spoiled teenagers with a credit card that has no limit on it. That's essentially the way the U.S. government is acting, like a spoiled teenager who's been given a credit card that has no credit limit. And like a spoiled teenager with no job, given unlimited credit, you spend like crazy, and eventually that bill is going to come due, and who's going to pay it? Not the teenager. The teenager's not going to pay that. It's going to be up to the teenager's parents, or in this case, the citizens of this country, to pay that debt. Only we're not in any shape to pay it. This is unsustainable, and it is going to blow up in our faces. Many economists that I've listened to, it's funny how every time I start to do a video, I get a lot of background noise that I normally don't hear. Strange how that works. Anyway, a lot of economists that I'm listening to, and it's usually economists that are independent from the government or federal agencies or anything like that. Also, they're typically independent of media sources, mainstream media. But many economists are already predicting a coming crash. When it will happen, they're not sure. It's hard to predict exactly when these things will happen. but they're predicting possibly within the next year, possibly within 2024. And a few of those economists that I've been listening to and reading from are predicting a potentially Great Depression rivaling crash that's coming. Now, I'm not going to be able to get to all these, I don't think, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try to go through this really fast. As I mentioned while I was reading the last article, this next article also comes from Watcher Guru. BRICS countries dump $123 billion in US Treasuries in 2023. Now again, the US sells our treasuries to other countries. We then take that money to try to pay our bills and pay for all of this spending, all this money that's going to Ukraine, for all this economic aid to all these countries that hate us. So we're essentially borrowing money to send out to other people while we're going broke here at home. All right, so a handful of countries from the BRICS alliance are cutting ties with the U.S. Treasury by offloading Treasury bonds. BRICS is increasingly looking to diversify its portfolios with gold, local currencies, and other commodities such as oil and gas. This ties in with what I told you in one of my last videos about how central banks of other countries are actively buying up metric tons of gold. And I'm not talking about 2, 3, or 4 tons of gold. I'm talking about 30, 40, 50, 60, 75 metric tons of gold. And they're doing it on a monthly basis in some cases. The move is a hedge against U.S. economic policies that will narrow down the dollar's ability to fund its deficit. Recent data from the U.S. Treasury Department shows that BRICS dumped $18.9 billion in U.S. Treasury bonds just this month. I'm going to stop right there for just a second. China is our biggest debt holder of the U.S. They hold more U.S. debt than any other country. If all of these countries, particularly China, start dumping our treasuries, the value of the U.S. dollar is going to tank like a rock being dropped off a cliff. In 2023, BRICS offloaded $122.7 billion in U.S. Treasury bonds and is staying away from the government's debt. BRICS member China is the highest, as it offloaded, and here we go, as it offloaded $117.4 billion worth of U.S. government debt this year. Between June and July, China reduced its holdings from $835.4 billion to $821.8 billion, a decline of $13.6 billion. Let me stop right there for a second. Let me read that again. China being the largest holder of U.S. debt, between June and July, just within a 1-month period, China reduced its holdings from $835.4 billion to $821.8 billion, a decline of $13.6 billion. So China holds $821 billion worth of U.S. debt. Can you imagine what would happen to our dollar if they dumped every bit of that all at one time? It would destroy our economy. And don't think that that would be a potential weapon to use against us if we go to war with China. They could easily dump our treasuries, crash our economy while we're in a military conflict with them. Other BRICS member Brazil followed suit and reduced its U.S. Treasury holdings this year. Brazil's U.S. Treasury declined from $227.4 billion, in June to $224.7 billion in July, a slump of $2.7 billion. India followed a similar path, trimmed its holdings by $2.3 billion during the same period. India has also allegedly dumped the U.S. dollar in the forex markets to keep the value of the rupee from falling. Similarly, the United Arab Emirates saw its U.S. Treasury holdings fall by $300 million in July. UAE's holdings slipped from $65.2 billion in June to $64.9 billion the next month. In total, BRICS has removed $122.7 billion worth of U.S. Treasury bonds from its reserves in 2023. That is That is devastating to the value of and stability of the US dollar, particularly if they continue that trend. Okay, so two of these articles I'm going to skip over. I will include the links below, but the next article from Reuters, Fed is cutting staff after more than a decade of payroll growth. So even the Fed is laying off people. They're cutting about 300 people from its payroll this year, a small but rare reduction, adding to all the other layoffs and furloughs going on at the moment. Now the Federal Reserve is starting to streamline and cut back on its payroll. If you want to read the article, the link will be below. There's an article about the troubling bank failure at Heartland Tri-State Bank. They fell victim to a scam. Really builds confidence in the banking system in this country, doesn't it? And add to that, it's not in this article. If you want to read this particular article, which is from The Sun, troubling bank failure that saw all branches closed and is shrouded in mystery, leaving stink in the air for all customers. Currently undergoing investigation. It appears to be a scam that they fell victim to. This again ties in with some of the other things that I've mentioned in the past about the risky investments that banks are taking with depositors' money. All right. This next article comes from the Motley Fool, which I'm not a big fan of him, but it's something important you need to understand. At the start of 2023, seniors on Social Security saw their monthly benefits rise 8.7%. That was the largest cost of living adjustment, or COLA, to arrive in decades. But 2024's COLA is shaping up to be considerably smaller. As inflation is climbing, this is not part of the article, by the way. As inflation is climbing, they're cutting the cost of living adjustment for Social Security. People are already suffering. People are already tight on money, on a fixed budget, aren't going to get probably even a fraction of they're going to get a fraction of increase of what inflation is actually at. Inflation is going to outpace the COLA adjustment, in other words. So again, they're going to fall behind. And based on recent inflation data, the Nonpartisan Senior Citizens League is projecting that next year's COLA will come in at 3.2%. Okay, so inflation is up 3.7%, at least according to the government's numbers. Again, I would say that it's a lot higher than that. But they're projecting the Social Security cost of living adjustment is only going to come to 3.2%. That means you're going to have 0.5%, 0.5% less money than what inflation is going up. So things are going to be even more expensive for you. You're not going to be able to keep up with inflation. You're falling behind inflation. A raise of that size would give the average monthly $1,790 benefit a $57 lift. $57 a month. That's the raise they're getting. Clearly, that's a far cry from 8.7%, and it may be a number a lot of seniors aren't happy with. And this is why I don't like the Motley Fool. But while a 3.2% COLA might seem like a bad thing, in reality, it's actually not. Many Social Security recipients rely heavily on COLAs to be able to make ends meet. So a smaller raise might seem like a blow, especially after 2023's generous 8.7 increase. However, one thing to keep in mind is if you're disappointed by recent COLA projections for 2024 is that those raises are directly tied to inflation. So a smaller COLA simply means that inflation has cooled, while a larger COLA means that inflation has been more rampant and disrupted. There you go, the Motley Fool. I do not like that man. I really do not. Because He spends everything pretty much the same way the government does. So he's trying to say that getting a smaller cost of living raise is a good thing. We already know from one of the articles I just read you, inflation is up 3.7%. The raise is only up 3.2%. That's a 0.5% difference. And he goes on to say that it's worth noting that while a 3.2% COLA clearly can't compare to 8.7% raise, it's also higher than average Social Security COLA over the past 20 years. So, it's another reason it's not so bad is because it's more than what we've given out in the last 20 years. Really? You folks, be prepping. And I understand. I have family members on Social Security. My mother was on disability before she passed away, and she didn't even get the $17.90. She didn't even get half of that. She barely cleared $700 a month on disability. So I know it's hard if you're on Social Security. Money's tight, you're on a fixed budget. Find ways to prep. Because the raises will not match inflation. They're going to lag behind, so that means even though you're getting raises for cost of living adjustments, inflation is still going to outpace that. Our debt is the main driver of this inflation. The more we keep borrowing, the more we keep printing, the more we keep sending over to places like Ukraine and to countries that hate us, the more our debt goes up, the more our inflation goes up, the more things cost. Every time we borrow money, print money, and send it overseas, things here at home cost more because we have to foot the bill for it. Because our dollar loses value every time that happens. This video is dragging on. I didn't want to drag on too long, but I did want to get it out there. There's a crash coming, folks. It's going to be bad. I don't know exactly when it's going to happen. My gut is telling me sometime next year, like some of these analysts are saying. But I could be wrong because the government always seems to find new ways of kicking the can down the road a little bit longer. We're in a recession now. We already are. We've been in one for a while. But the numbers I'm hearing, the numbers I'm seeing, indicate that there could be a crash coming that is going to make the Great Depression look like a bank holiday. You need to be ready, folks. Don't get complacent. Don't take it for granted. Things are still, at least on the surface, things still seem to look good. It's not going to last that long because although the surface kind of looks calm with just a few ripples here and there, there's a lot of volatility, a lot of churning going on underneath, and eventually it will hit us. It will catch up to us and we will pay the price for it. People will suffer. Prep while you can. That's all I got to say. I appreciate you guys watching. Again, like, share, subscribe if you haven't. It really helps out the algorithm and helps with shadow banning and censorship. I appreciate everybody watching. I really do. With that, that's all I've got. Until next time, folks, take care, and I'll catch you later.